Hi, Misha here, and it seemed like a good time to kind of compare Rollerlock 9mm imports, not US kit guns, and these are the guns commonly based on the MP5. And kind of working our way from the oldest, we have the POF-5, POF MP5. These first started to appear in 2014. Then we have the MKE Z-5. This is a Z-5K, but they've done several versions. And these appeared from Zenith in 2015 for a few years. And most recently we have the Heckler Koch SP5 from 2019 onward. So yeah, all based on the MP5 and all true imports. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through the evolution. I've got this one set up here as kind of an early MP5A2. This one's set up as a late MP5A3 or even A5 if you will. And of course this is the shorty, set up as an MP5K and what have you. And so I thought I would talk about the pros and the cons to each, as well as the history and comparison, shooting, and what have you. I will say that I've had a lot of trigger time with this POF here. I've also had several years with this MKE, and have only had this HK out to the range once so far, but let's be honest, it's an HK. It ran. I'm not really worried about that. So with that, let's just dive right in. POF full size. SP5. Fuck you, Osama. One thing I want to say off the bat. HK people, they get into this whole original versus clone versus contract thing. The German one here would be considered original. These two would be considered contract guns because both Turkey and Pakistan had a license to produce the MP5 as well as other HK guns. This is unique to the HK community. You don't hear of contract FALs or contract AKs. I mean, yeah, a lot of people like the original Izhevsk or Izhmash Russian guns that have been imported, but they don't consider the Romanian or Chinese any less legitimate because they're made in a true military factory. And I'm just saying this because I don't view these inherently worse or less authentic than I do this one. So I'm going to give pretty equal weight in the beginning and equal opportunity for any of these guns. I don't necessarily believe that an MP5 can only come from Germany. In fact, one of these guns is actually marked MP5 and it is not from Germany. But I just wanted to get that out there. Also, as always, if you could, please like, share, subscribe, and if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to the Patreon page. And with that, let's dive into our oldest import here and talk about the early days of the Heckler Koch MP5. We begin with my trusty old Pakistan Ordnance Factory POF-5, or as it likes to call itself based on the top markings, just MP5. And this is in a pretty early to mid MP5A2 configuration, fixed stock, steel lower without the ambi safety. I put a thin foregrip on it. Why not? It's made into a carbine with an extension. And here's an earlier style mag. This was really one of the first modern imports with the paddle release and what have you, but obviously not the first MP5 roller 9mm import. And it all began, of course, in 1959 when West Germany's Bundeswehr adopted the G3, which was a license-produced version and variant of the SEPME Model 1958 or Model B. And it would originally be manufactured by not only HK, but Rheinmetall. In fact, it wouldn't be until sometime later that HK would essentially claim all the rights and what have you for the MP5 design, even though it's obviously identified with them today. But yeah, the G3 would take off, and from there, with the success of the G3, HK had the great idea to make a family of guns. It was a battle rifle in 7.62 NATO 308, and they decided to do a couple of intermediate rifles or carbines, one in 7.62 by 39, which really didn't go much of anywhere except for some trials versions, and another in the very new 223, later 5.56 NATO cartridge, known as the HK-33. And then, of course, that would get us to the HK-54, which was a submachine gun size, firing 9x19, 9mm Parabellum, or 9mm NATO. And the earliest versions of HK-54s were revealed around 1964, and they originally operated under this name, but they looked a little different, much as early G3s looked different. They didn't have our good old classic diopter sights. They had more of a traditional, ladder sight. They also had more of a traditional grayish, blackish phosphate finish. And they had a slim metal handguard that was ventilated. And they had a few internal differences, including a heavier, kind of clunkier bolt system. And this would give way to the MP5 as such around 1966. And this is when it would first see some adoption by German police and eventually the German Navy and some special forces like GSG-9. This is when we start to kind of get to the modern gun. Now, we'll talk about the MP5A1 here in a minute. It was introduced around 1969. The MP5A2 with the fixed buttstock came out in 1970, along with the collapsing stock version MP5A3. And by this time, we're getting to the modern diopter sights for position here from 25 up to 100 meters, hooded front post, and also we're going to a new pattern of handguard. We would first go to kind of more of a metal version, then we'd have this polymer with metal heat shield. It's still what we consider a slimline handguard. And we would start to go to this lower with a metal housing. It's not ambidextrous yet, although they would start using the SEF markings. So we have a steel lower with a polymer grip and a popsicle. And yeah, originally they used these straight, often called waffle mags, in either 15 or 30 rounds. By the way, this is an original German military, army, police style pouch. It holds 3. And yeah, that was the genesis of that. And this finish here, the kind of, we'll call it the paint finish, appeared around 1977, 1978. And the guns, of course, would continue to be updated over time. Now, as for the POF factory, Pakistan Ordnance Factory, they negotiated a license to build various HK products, including the MP5. Now, POF started up in 1951 with assistance from the Royal Ordnance Factory of the UK, of Britain, and is quite a large conglomerate today. It's government owned. It's owned by the Ministry of Defense. It consists of 14 factories and several enterprises, commercial. It produces the standard MP5, is the MP5A2. Now the collapsing stock version, because their collapsing stock is ever so slightly different, is called an MP5P3. They also do four-way trigger versions, is the MP5P4 and MP5P5. And they've actually made their own version that's compact, known as the SMG-PK. It uses a standard receiver, but has a different front end. So let's put a pin in that for just a moment. I want to tell you this because POF, as you know, has been making select fire guns for the Pakistani Army, police, and for export to dozens of nations. In fact, they are fully ISO rated and in the past have produced parts under subcontract for Germany even. And their parts, some are a little nicer finished than German, some are not as nicely finished, but if they're spec parts, not rejects or anything else, they are as durable as a German part because these are fully licensed by HK, including providing them blueprints, drawings, of course, tooling, setting things up, and providing advisors and what have you.
POF, full size.
Now let's talk about the MP5K and MKE in Turkey. Remember the MP5A1 I mentioned? That was the first. It was a standard MP5 with an 8.5-inch barrel that had an end cap on it with a sling swivel. That was the first attempt at a PDW, a more compact version. But in 1976, they got more serious about this as the world was changing, terrorism was on the rise. Yeah, they needed something more of as a PDW, and that's where this kind of comes from. We have an end plate. It's a different style. It goes internal with different pinholes. It is shortened in the back. It's also shortened in the front. Shortened bolt group, which actually in a full auto gun leads to a higher rate of fire. The rear sights were modified to make them lower profile. In fact, there's actually a version with an even lower profile than this. And of course, the barrel is quite a bit shorter, at about 4.5 inches for the standard version. And this is a very good representation, including the newer pattern of 15-round mag. The only concession, really, aside from some auto, is that it doesn't have the vertical foregrip because, you know, AOW stuff. Flipping this over, it has a newer pattern of lower polymer with the hollow pistol grip and finger grooves, but it's still single-sided only with a metal selector, cocking handle, all this good stuff. So the MP5K was popular with law enforcement, private security, protection agencies, and in fact you saw us shooting this one when we did the video on the Berger and Tomat APC-9 recently. And MKE in Turkey obtained a license under much the same conditions and agreements as POF did in Pakistan, getting all the tooling and stuff, and they opted to produce the MP5A2, MP5A3, also the MP5SD, an integrally suppressed version first introduced in 1974, and the MP5K, whereas Pakistan did not agree to license produce the K. They also would produce some semi-autos over the years. We've had a few different ones in the country. Originally, ATI imported some. This one is a Zenith, and most recently, Century Arms is importing them. And each time this happens, there are minor changes. But yeah, these are fully licensed, produced gun to HK spec, and it shows because parts are interchangeable. And this has been a very reliable little gun, which is something I can't say for a lot of the aftermarket clones and copies. Now
I am rolling.
Fire the MP5K, the Zenith Z-5K, really. Okay. So let's get the HK out now. This is again how it came. The end cap on this is very much like the MP5A1 style. This has the newer tropical or wide handguard, which appeared as an option around 1978. So you could have the wide or the narrow, and countries would kind of do their thing. And of course this has the newer style lower, which would first appear on the MP5 A4 and A5 series, and would continue on and be developed for the MP5N for the Navy, which this is directly based on. Ambidextrous selector, no finger grooves, pictogram top lower, and the barrel's extended out to about 8 3/4, maybe 8.9, with both a tri-lug and half by 28 threads. Now looking at the MP5K, when the Navy was introduced in 1986, it was quite successful. So in 1991, they took a look at the MP5K, they extended the barrel out, giving it this kind of profile. So it was over about 5.5 inches now, with a 3-lug, and they contracted with Choate Tool of the US to make a quick deployable, lightweight, durable side-folding stock. And with the stock, foregrip, and the 3-lug extended barrel, this would become the MP5K PDW, again in 1991. So they're very much continuing to develop the family and kind of learning what works. And for what it's worth, here's the PDW type folding stock, although this one is made for a full-size receiver, not a MP5K, because I don't have a K version that's SBR. So this is for the POF if I decide I'm going to put a folding stock on it. But yeah, it gives you the idea of the PDW style butt stock. I actually really like this stock. It's very easy to deploy. Like so. It even has the buffer inside.
POF-K.
Before we really dig into HK German stuff, I wanted to mention one thing. Remember how I said that Turkey produced the MP5K under license, but POF Pakistan, they did not. Rather, they got a little tricky, a little sneaky. They produced what they called the SMG-PK for Pakistan. And they claim this was an indigenous design, therefore not under HK. Okay, what they basically did, they took a standard MP5 receiver, full length in the back, as opposed to the cut down MP5K, but then they put a MP5K front end with the shortened cocking tube, handguard, and barrel instead of the full length. We would know this as a reverse stretch in the US, and many will accredit American gun designers or gunsmiths with coming up with the reverse stretch, but actually Pakistan did it quite some time ago. And the benefits, you get to have more common parts, and you get to use a common buttstock as opposed to a specialist one on the K here. And you also have a slower rate of fire because of the longer mass back there. And yeah, they would typically have it with a retracting stock, although there are some pictures of them with just an end cap as well. So there's a couple of versions, but it's kind of interesting. It's, again, marked SMG-PK. Now, in Pakistan, the semi-automatic SMG-PK is known as the POF-4, and the semi-automatic full-size is known as the POF-5. As far as the MKE guns, well, they've gone under several names over the year. T94, AT94, Z-5, and what's Century calling them now? AP9, something like that. They keep changing names quite a bit. So, yeah, with that, now let's get to the main meat of this video. The German gun, and if it's really worth the squeeze compared to either of these. As I know you know, this is not the first MP5 semi-auto to come in the US. That honor would go to the HK-94, which first appeared in 1983. It was a carbine version, much like our POF here. It was sold in both A2 fixed stock and A3 collapsing stock versions, and it had a rather long 16 and nearly a half-inch barrel that was a relatively heavy profile. At least always kind of seemed so to me. Maybe I'm mistaken, but yeah. And those really didn't sell great because, well, it was a long-barreled 9mm carbine. And then, of course, in 1989, we received the SP-89, a pistol version of the the MP5K. But of course, nothing good lasts. The HK-94 was banned for civilian sales in 1989 because of the executive order. The SP-89 would soldier on until 1994, but then the assault weapons ban, as part of the crime bill, put a weight restriction on quote-unquote pistols, and it was just too much for that. It just politically wasn't good for HK, so they stopped importing the SP-89 in 1994. The HK-94, which of course this isn't, but you know it does for it, there was one final import batch under a government tender in 1991, wherein the state of California imported a little over 400 for use by their Department of Corrections and other police agencies. Eventually, many of these would be sold off as surplus too, which is kind of neat. But these were the last HK-94s imported into the USA. And the SP-89 was the last, and it seemed that was it. HK had moved on, they had gone to the UMP. They really didn't have any interest in dealing with the US civilian market, making semi-autos, and they really didn't have any interest in the MP5. And this held true for over 20 years. But in 2016, they would import the SP5K, which was again based on the SP-89, so the K version. That's awesome. It was German, but it was a little goofy. It had a flat muzzle without the 3-lug. It did not have the paddle mag release, and it had a pick rail welded on top. In other words, it had a very modern look to it that many did not want. They wanted a classic gun. Some settled for the SP5K as it came out in 2016. Others, like myself, waited. And in 2019, we were rewarded with the SP5 here. And we're going to be modifying this before we take it to the range, but I wanted to show as it comes in. End cap, it has the claw mounts on top, and it has the paddle mag release, as you know. And just as important, it has a full featured barrel, 3-lug and half by 28. I should point out that the POF has the same thing, tri-lug and half by 28. And versions of the Z-5, known as the Z-5P, were sold with the same features too, as well as the Z-5 RS. So HK was behind the game, but they finally joined in towards the tail end of 2019, just in time for the COVID gun buying panic. So for over a year, these guns have been hard to get and been going for crazy money if you could find one, and I wasn't about that. But finally, prices are starting to drop, availability is starting to become available, and this one came in as a trade, and it felt like the right time finally. So, is it worth it? Or are the Turkish and Pakistani guns just as good? Well, let's try and find out. And here's the SP5 ready to go to the range. I decided to put my flash hider on it, and I put a 3-point sling. Has the modern curved mag and the droppable handguard, and it has the PDW collapsing brace from SP Tactical. Really, with these features, this is more of an MP5 A5 or even MP5N Navy. It had the tri-lug and HAPA 28 threads. Originally had night sights. It had this ambidextrous extended safety lower and the collapsing buttstock. And here we are with the brace fully deployed. While HK did work on the UMP in the 90s, introducing it as the successor to the MP5, it still continued to develop, at least maintain, the fleet. For example, in 1999, the MP5F was designed specifically for the French military. It had an improved, stronger stock with a rubber butt pad. It was a collapsible. It had a heavy buffer inside to handle hot 9mm plus P loads, and it was more ambidextrous. And then in 2013, the midlife improvement program kicked off, and basically this standardized the buttstock and some of the other things from the MP5F, as well as going to a new tri-rail handguard for optics. It also introduced a new, more modern optics mount versus the old claw style, and HK began to offer it in different colors, not just the painted black. HK really did want to kind of retire the MP5 in favor of the UMP and other designs, but it was kind of kept around by popular demand, and that's really how we ended up with the SP5K and SP5. So now that this is ready to go in a shootable format, let's cut back to the range and kind of talk about it versus the POF and MKE.
Let's see here. A little to your right.
Alrighty.
That's good.
First shots out of the SP5. Not bad. All three of these guns have been very reliable with a wide range of ammunition and magazines. Of course, a little bit of allowance has to be given to the MP5K. The shorter you go, yeah, the less reliable. But that said, it's actually very reliable gun. The POF here has just been gangbusters as far as reliability. So really, on that department, they're pretty well equal. One area you couldn't really talk about is fit and finish. And it comes as little to no surprise that, yeah, probably the German is easily the best there. But this is cosmetic, and I have to admit, I don't think these are ugly guns. The POF's finish is a little but of course you can always just repaint it. But the weld, like here for the trunnion, is very nicely done. The cocking handle tube is fine. The Zenith has a couple of little tacks visible there, but nothing terrible. And the tube has a nice enough weld, I suppose. And this does have a little nicer paint finish. And of course, the German has probably the best weld marks and paint finish, frankly. Trigger wise, they're, well, your typical HK triggers. Nothing to write home about. I will say that none of them are loose or wiggly with the lower frames or anything. And just kind of looking here, the front weld is pretty clean on the POF. It's fine. Again, we're talking weld marks. Of course, the German looks very nice. For what it's worth, flipping them over. Keep in mind, again, I've had the POF and shot it a good deal. And the MKE. Again, I'm not really seeing a whole lot of just horrid difference compared to like the US guns, at least some of the early ones, like the special weapons. They all have perfectly good welds. And this is sheet steel, stamped steel that's welded together. So you have to kind of give allowances for that. But all three operate properly, smoothly, and I really have no complaints. So even though the German does have the best fit and finish, it's not night and day difference. Noticeable, but not a major deal. And like I said, all have been reliable, and all are pretty well HK parts compatible because all three are contract guns. So with that, let's kind of talk about what I like and dislike about each one individually. POF-5 pros. I really like the roll marking, how it legitimately just says MP5 on top. That's neat. And for better or worse, you can tell that these were just military type guns that had a semi-automatic lower put on them. And to me, that's neat. Others may disagree, and that's fine. They do have a blocking bar in the back, though. Some might not like that if you have a registered trigger pack, but I don't. The reason for that, this was the first one to be allowed in with not only a flapper mag release, which we've seen before in imports, but an actual true push pin lower. So it's very authentic styling here, disassembly and all of that. And that to me is just neat. Plus the price point. These were always the cheapest of the three here, no matter which era you're in. And so it was a legitimate contract MP5 for as reasonable of a price point as you could get. Hard to say, prices change, but roughly speaking between $1,200 and $1,600 depending on the era. The only cons, like I said, the finish can be spotty on these, and sometimes there can be issues with mag fitment, and the welds, while they're stable, may not always be the prettiest on the POF guns. Also, when you buy these, you get a cardboard box, a manual, and a magazine. So they have the lightest on the accessory end of things. But yeah, this is a correctly set up MP5A2 down to the steel lower. Now I did put this slim handguard on. They come with the standard wide handguard, but you know, I had a thing I was going for. Note that it does have the correct MP5 turret or diopter rear sight too. And it also does have the clip here for the 3-point sling, as well as the mounts on the top for a claw scope. So what about our Turkish friend? ATI imported these first, and Century imports them today, but the Z-5 series was kind of when I was buying them here, and I went for the Z-5K because it's a legitimate MP5K with the, kind of reminds me of a hammerhead style front end, with the barrel just ending right there. Short system, true shortened rear receiver. These plates in the back weren't added to prevent anything. They're on the military MP5Ks as well. And notice that it has the notched rear sight. That is correct for an MP5K. And then it has the kind of mid-generation all polymer lower, but it's not the ambidextrous. Like the POF, it has a push pin in the lower with paddle mag release. And correctly so, it doesn't have the clip here for the 3-point sling. Nor does it have the front sling loop. Now the MP5K PDW would have those, but the K does not. So that's why I went for the K. Because before this, we kind of had interesting hodgepodges. So the pros, you know, it's a true K, and it does have nice fit and finish. In fact, sometimes a little too tight. There were issues with magazines fitting a little tight in these. That's probably the biggest issue we had with some of them when they first came out. They did ship with 3 mags, a sling, a cleaning kit, even a scope mount. They shipped in a hard case, and it looked neat, but the plastic molding it had, while it gave very nice presentation, it limited your options. If you were to SBR one, it would no longer fit in its case, and no other gun would fit in its case. And these were a little more expensive than the POFs. The Ks were the cheapest. They were around $1,800-$1,900. But you did get the extra stuff, the extra mags, and the claw mount. When these are brand new, they were a little less reliable than the POFs, but mostly that was because of how tight they made them. Typically, after you broke them in with some NATO spec 124 grain ammo, they would run very, very nicely. So you could tell they were really trying to make a quality gun here, at least in the beginning, because this is from the first import batch. And these were a nice alternative to the POFs because they were doing some things that Pakistan Ordnance Factory would never do. And now we have to get to the original German. Now you might think there's really nothing to complain about here except the price. And yes, these are the most expensive. Hard to pin it down, but maybe $3,000 at the moment. This should come down to about $2,800, maybe even lower in time. The quality, the fit and finish is great. It's a real German. It will definitely hold value very well. But configuration-wise, of the 3, I probably do have the most complaints here. But hear me out. For one, it has the K-style, or pistol-style turret with the notches, rear sight. This is not really correct. I think HK does it just to give it that more pistol air, and it is quite easy to change it out. But for what you spend, you know, hey, it should have the rear sight like this POF with the peeps, but it does not. Now, on the positive end, it does have the flapper paddle mag release, something that the HK94 and HK SP89 did not have. But the POF and the MKE both have the push pin lower. The HK does not. It still uses the old school shelf type lower. that's not as cool. There are some benefits, especially if you have a registered sear pack and don't want to goof around with that stuff. But, I don't know. I like the push pin. So yeah, I'm just trying to be fair. That's all expected, honestly. But, on the other hand, you get the modern Navy-style lower with extended ambi safety. Wide handguard. You get the full 3-lug and threaded barrel. And the fit and finish is superb, as you'd expect from an HK. And it comes with some nice accessories, as you saw at the beginning of the video. It has a nice, useful tactical case, 2 mags, a sling, and a tool for the sight. So, it actually doesn't come with as much as the Zenith, but it's close. And it comes with a lot more than the POF. And again, I can't emphasize enough that the collector value of this will certainly be higher. So all in all, it's still probably the best of the 3 from that standpoint. But it also has some of the most noticeable compromises to make it a semi-auto.
POF full size.
Now we'll let J-Ro try the MP5K, the Zenith. I'm so gonna get
Yeah, I liked it a lot better with the extendable stock.
arm brace.
Yeah, well,
Arm brace.
whatever. Rolling.
Alrighty, SP5.
Pretty smooth.
And that's with Tula too, so even cycles Tula. So ranking these. Honestly, I have them all because they each fill a niche in the collection, and it's nice to have variants, especially after all those years of less than stellar clones and copies and parts builds from the USA. But if I had to rank them, I would say number 3 would be the Zenith. I really like that it's a push pin lower. I really like that it's a paddle mag release. The fit and finish is good, but sometimes they went a little too far. They made these a little too tight. And while they came with a lot of accessories, you were paying for stuff that you may not have wanted. And yeah, there were a few odd issues with these as well. Not all of them, not even most of them, but some of them had some odd issues. And they're marked Z-5. So, you know, very much a sporter name. Again, really good guns, not trashing them, but I'm just having to pick here. Next, of course, number 2 would be the POF. I've always had a soft spot for this gun. I love how authentic it is. And by that I mean close to a military MP5. Be it a Pakistani, Turkish, or German. Because it really does seem like they used as many of the original military parts right off the same production lines for these that they did for those. Again, right up I think the MP5 name roll mark is cool. The steel lower is neat. You just don't see many of those. And price-wise, it was a great entry-level MP5 Rollerlock 9mm. In fact, a lot of US kit guns were a lot more expensive than these. So why not? Plus, it's been 100% reliable. And while I hear people complaining about the fit and finish a bit on these, they almost always seem to run great. And of course, number 1 has to be the SP5. For the reasons I just mentioned. Even though it has a few shortcomings, the rear sight can easily be corrected. The push pin lower, well, you don't get that. Oh well, you'll live. But it's the original. If you can afford it, it's going to serve you the best. It's going to be the most reliable. And it's just going to be the one that holds the value for the longest. But the downside, of course, is the price point. So it's up to you. I honestly think if you can't afford this, if you find the nice condition POF, you'll be well served. So take it for what you will. The truth is, 20 years ago, none of us could have believed we would have had one authentic MP5 import, much less 3. So all in all, it's a win, no matter which one you go with, frankly. And it shows that these are all made in authentic military factories because they run. And you don't have to do a lot of crazy breaking in or any of that jazz. They just work. As far as how I have them configured, well, this one I have set up as the original MP5K. This one I really like. I've always been a fan of the A2 stock. And when I configured it like this, that was long before the braces that look like A2 stocks came out. And for this one, yeah, I went with the SB PDW brace. And it is it's mighty comfortable, mighty useful. A little bit of a short throw, but that's alright. That's to be expected. It fits quite tight, slides in and out with basically no friction, and fits the back of the gun, no problems. It does have the rubber buffer in, which I know some people had trouble with, but my gun had no trouble with that buffer in this whatsoever, so take it as you will. I always think these flash hiders are neat. Anyway, this seemed like a fun comparison to do. I'm sure we'll revisit the SP5 in the future. So if you have any questions, please do post them. If you own any of these, we'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. And as I said at the beginning, if you'd like to help support us, do please check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.